Hi, this is Seb with an overwhelming cold, so my voice will be deeper and raspier than usual. I have a pretty low voice, but when I have the cold, I can sound like Darth Vader sometimes, at least to my ears. I was thinking about doing a little video after having a morning chat on Facebook with our good friend Same Old G, and we get to talk about many things, the games we plan and our way of seeing at things. And yeah, I had this idea for a while to do a video about maybe just GM advice on certain stuff. Sorry. As I said maybe before, I was at the beginning of my GMing career more of a simulationist. Now I have progressed to somewhat of an equilibrium between all the things I think it's important in a game. But I often hear about GMs who want their game to be more realistic and more of a simulation of reality. And maybe I have some tips for the GM who want to be more simulationist, since I've started there. And I remember when I was a younger GM, I wasn't even interested so much in the story or create story for story's sake, or even game terms or game system. I wanted a game that portrayed reality to the hilt. I wanted stuff to happen randomly and in a realistic way. My first game were Marvel superhero, not a very simulationist game, but when I discovered GURPS and Palladium Heroes Unlimited, where a bullet can kill your average superhero, I was really excited, and every game I did in those formative years were tainted with realism and simulation of reality. But reality is a strange concept, and to make your game more realistic or more simulationist, here's some advice. Take it or not. You're free to do whatever you want, of course. And those are just my little humble opinion on the subject. If they shock you or do not please you, well, you can just go elsewhere. This is for entertainment value and not trying to pick a fight or whatever. So, the great author Mark Twain once said that truth is stranger than fiction, but it is because fiction is obligated to stick to possibilities. Truth isn't. This quote, when I've discovered this quote from the genius Mark Twain, my jaw dropped to the floor. It was the expression of my GMing style from the beginning to the middle, I would say. For 10 years at least, I was that simulationist guy, were more interested in realistic reaction and events than story crafting or even game rules. I still prefer generic game rules, but this idea that the truth or the reality is stranger than fiction, than fictional event that we wrote or craft. The fact that the real life is more like in the quantum mechanic world, random and and changing and weird. This idea was very profound, and it was like the expression of what I was searching for. That was, of course, before I've looked at my hobby with another lens before my eyes, but that's for another subject. I've also heard a neuroscientist on the radio. He's a guy here in Quebec City who is really versed in the neuroscience field, and in the radio he's really a good commentator, and he once said a sentence that really struck my mind. He said that the main function of the brain was to explain or find logic or rationalize the world around us. It was kind of our decryptor of all we experience. Thus, the main function of our brain is just to create logic out of this weirdness around us. So, starting from those two quotes, that truth is stranger than fiction and that the function of the brain is to explain everything, how can we use it in a game? Well, in order to have a story that is well received, I think it must be well written, and the well-crafted story have the most impact because they are constructed. For example, if I can use Hamlet, I'm certain that Shakespeare did not write this masterpiece out of his head just by piecing together random events and just having a convenient ending to the story. Hamlet is a well-written, crafted story that fills every little nicks and crannies we crave as humans when we need to hear a story. It must fulfill every little space, every little emotional space we have, and this story is really great for that. It really covers every angle of human nature: the revenge, the love, the passion, the manipulation, the treason. It's really like an ultimate story, which you can use as a template for your own game. But it will be that. It will be a construct. It will be something created to have certain effect. And this in the threefold model is very narrative. It's very constructed. And I have the impression that several of my fellow GM out there, most of them are really fantasy game master, dungeon master, if I can use a term. Personally, I prefer the term game master, since fantasy is just a switch. It's just a genre. But for most people, the hobby is really about fantasy, the fantasy genre, not as a fantasy escapism. It all is. But I get to think about that, and my tips for a GM that want to be more realistic, more simulationist, would be to use these two quotes from Mark Twain: "Truth is stranger than fiction." For example, let's use the classic random encounter table. It's a great tool to make stuff happening at random in your game. Suppose you want to go from point A to point B. You cross a forest, and you have an encounter table for this forest. It's really good. You don't know what's going to happen. You know that you have to roll in the forest to see if something will come up, and oftentimes it will. Don't you feel a little bit cheap when you roll on the table and it says, nothing happened? most GM I know will just re-roll or just pick some stuff on the table and make stuff happen on the way, even though they didn't roll anything. The problem with this random encounter table, even if it's a great tool, the random tables are confined to their own possibilities. If you have 100 entries in your random encounter table, it's just 100 possibilities for stuff to happen in the forest. It doesn't encompass all the little possibilities, but the fact that you have to roll on this confined table limit your option, and oftentimes these encounters will be created just to fit with the genre you're playing. A younger version of me, more simulationist than today, maybe. I'm still am. I used to say to my player, in a game, I tell you what is happening and not what's supposed to happen. And by that phrase, that gives you the ultimate power to describe anything and just to pop stuff out of the blue. And without knowing it, I was using Mark Twain's approach to story, and it was very simulationist. I'm not saying you're supposed to do this all the time. I mean, if you throw random stuff all the time at your player, it won't make any sense, and we need that kind of sense. These tips are maybe more just little advice to sometimes spice up your game, because a game is not supposed to be a hardcore simulation of reality. It's supposed to be an equilibrium between several factors. So today's idea would be this: if you want your game to be more realistic, a little bit more a simulation of life, you should try to insert little random things and explain them later. Or maybe not. Just let little stuff happen. Maybe as your hero leaves the village to go on a quest, maybe a little girl scream and pass by them and just scream the random stuff. You don't have to explain it. A child sometimes will do that, and maybe some of your player will start to freak out and ask maybe it's a sign of the gods or a prophecy. It's just a kid messing around. Maybe she was bitten in the ass by a bee, or I don't know. It feels more real if you have kids fooling around in a city. It's more real. It feels more real. And you don't have to explain their behavior. They're kids. They will do the craziest shit. I know, I'm a father. Or maybe one of your players someday will remember something like, hey, remember that time when that moose crashed into the tavern while that bard was singing Lola in the heavens? That poor bard pissed in his pants, and now he's called Moose Peace, the peeing bard. You see, you don't have to justify yourself. A moose just crashed into the inn. Maybe you gave him an AC of 50 and nobody could touch the damn moose. He just crashed and passed through the tavern and just left, and nobody saw it again. It's random. It's maybe extreme. It's not a kid just playing around. It's a damn moose just crashing your party, just crashing your table as you were eating. But in a fantasy world, that stuff can happen. And later you'll try to explain what happened. Maybe a druid just charmed the moose and asked him to charge into the city to to make these city dwellers pay for some wrongs he had, or just maybe it was just a moose with a disease. Maybe he got the rage or something, and he just charged into the tavern. Maybe there was a female moose on the door, painted near the front of the door, and maybe he thought it was a potential mate. I don't know. You don't have to explain it. You can just let it happen and let your let your player figure it out. I mean, if let stuff happen in your game, as in real life. Don't try to do a version. Don't try to explain it too much. Your collective mind, your collective gaming mind with your player will fill out the details, and reasons will be there. You'll find why. It must. It's a function of our brain. Everything that seems a little odd or weird, our brain will try to have an answer for that. And so I guess what I'm saying is, for the simulationist GM out there, don't craft your encounter too much, maybe. Just let stuff happen sometime, like in real life. I'm not saying that you should put the weirdest shit in your game all the times. It's all about balance. It's all about harmony. But sometimes the game needs that little extra jolt of pure randomness and weirdness. After all, the adventurers are not normal people, and they are not facing normal events and current stuff, mundane. Explanation, why, who, when, why, will sooner or later become apparent in your game. Because as human, we are really good at that. Thanks for watching.